Welcome everybody to the Woman on the Land, Forests Are for the Birds webinar. We're thrilled that you all are able to join us tonight. We want to start off tonight's webinar by thanking the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation for funding this webinar through the Working Forest Initiative. I now am going to turn it over to Emma, who will be discussing Woman on the Land.
All right, thank you, Julia, for that lovely welcome. So we are super excited to get started tonight. We have some really wonderful presenters, but first I'd like to introduce another event that will be happening soon. So in May, we will be hosting a follow-up event to this webinar. It will be a woods walk at Helfin Farm, which is a property of the Dartmouth Natural Resources Trust. Linda Vandeveer, who is another member of Women on the Land, and she is the land manager of Dartmouth Natural Resources Trust, will be talking about her process of starting to manage the land for American woodcock habitat. And Marianne Pichet, who is a habitat management biologist from Mass Wildlife, will also be joining us to share her expertise. And so we're very excited for this. It'll be happening on May 7th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we have just put a link in the chat to sign up for the walk if you are interested, and we would be thrilled to have you. So for tonight, I'll quickly give an overview of our agenda. So we will start off tonight with a poll question and then move into our presentations by our featured speakers. So our first speaker will be Michele Grzenda. Michele is the conservation director for the town of Lincoln, as well as a birding expert. And she'll be discussing the basics of bird identification and some bird watching tips. And then we'll move into our second speaker, Barbara Wallace, who is a landowner, and she has used forest management to improve bird habitat on her own property. And then finally, we will have a Q&A session where you all will get a chance to talk to our speakers about any questions you might have had during our presentations. So first, to get a sense of where everybody is joining us from tonight, we will have a poll question. So if you feel comfortable as that pops up on your screens, please select the region you're joining us from. Yeah, oh, there it is. All right, and we'll give that a few more seconds to get everybody a chance to get their responses in. All right, fantastic. So let's take a look at those results. So it looks like—
That was quick.
It was quick. It looks like most people are joining us from the Connecticut River Valley. We have quite a few people from Berkshire County and Central Mass. And we have a couple from north of Boston and greater Boston, and we have a couple from outside of Massachusetts. So welcome to everybody that is here, no matter where you're joining us from. So I will now be turning it over to our first presenter, Michele Grzenda, to give us an introduction to birding. Take it away, Michele.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Share, and it's gonna pause for a moment to find you all hidden in my screen somewhere. Let's see. Can't quite see you guys, but that's okay. I'm not gonna fret about it. Julia or Emma, you can let me know if there's any issues with the screen you're seeing. So hello everyone, my name is Michele Grzenda. I'm the conservation director for the town of Lincoln, and my love of birds started really as a child. My parents had bird feeders that I absolutely loved watching the birds come to our backyard, and that sparked a pretty major obsession of wanting to learn and study birds. I just felt drawn to it, and I was fortunate enough to take ornithology in college. And my first job out of college was actually doing a breeding bird survey in northern New Hampshire. And I had to learn 180 birds by song to be hired. And that was back in the day of cassette tapes and studying little tweets and chirps and twitters. And I'm not a musical person. I'm not really sadly not into music much. But there was just something about birdsong that drew me to them. And I really feel like when I head out to the forest or my backyard, that I'm just joining my group of friends as I hear them come alive in the morning. When you're studying birds in the woods, you're looking like that bottom right-hand corner, which is wearing a mist net, covering pretty much every part of your body, because the mosquitoes will eat you alive. And you're sitting and listening for 10 minutes, recording all the birds you hear. I was fortunate enough to do some bird studies where we actually trapped birds and put bands on them and released them. And so that picture on the left was the summer I spent in Montana volunteering for the US Forest Service, finding goshawks nesting sites around pine forests, because the Forest Service had to limit forestry activities within so much of a distance around goshawk nests. And so I was able to work with a professor and actually trap some goshawks. This is an immature goshawk, and they're pretty amazing animals. Okay, so enough about me. I'm hoping tonight to really give you a brief introduction about bird watching, some tools and tips, some resources, and also talk a little bit about what you can do to help the birds. And we'll have a section of that talking about forests for the birds. So I'm going to start off with 5 tips for beginners. I know not all of you are beginner birders, but it's always good to go back to the basics. And even if you are a very beginner birder, the good news is that there's certain patterns and there's certain things about birds that you probably already know, and you might not realize it. So one of the things is just the size and shapes of birds. Sometimes, probably even if you're a new birder looking at this picture, you can kind of see those silhouettes and be like, okay, the one on the right is a swan. Geese sort of have that look too. The one on the bottom left is a large bird of prey, like a hawk or an eagle. The middle picture is sort of your typical cardinal, robin, bluebird. And the upper left is it looks like an insect, but it's sort of like a hummingbird. So thinking about the shape and the size of a bird helps us group them into a certain order of birds. The second thing is thinking about habitat, season, and range. So if you have a bird book or have looked at a bird book, you might have seen that they often have this range map. I guess I'm starting with 2C, where it actually has different colors for each bird species. And those colors represent where that bird is found during the year. And the reality is that birds tend to be where they're supposed to be, according to these range maps. And so if you see on the bottom right, you've got 2 kind of brown sparrow looking birds, very similar looking. It'd be easy to have a hard time telling those 2 apart. But fortunately, if you're in Massachusetts, if you see the one on the right, if you see one of those birds, and it's in the wintertime, it's most likely a tree sparrow. Whereas in the summer months, it's most likely a chipping sparrow. And the range map helps us to learn what kind of bird we're going to expect in the certain season. Habitat is also very helpful in terms of where we are, whether you're in a wetland, a forest, or a field. There are certain species that prefer certain habitats, and we're going to do a deeper dive into forests later. Also, it's good to think about, back to that birds are typically where they're supposed to be. On the right, I have 2 pictures of a house finch and a purple finch. We do have a bunch of people in Western Mass, and that is where purple finches tend to be more. I have a lot of people in Eastern Mass, a lot of beginner bird watchers in Eastern Mass tell me, oh, they had a purple finch at their bird feeder. And I tend to think they probably are seeing house finch. It's just that it looks so purple, it looks so pink that people want to think of them as purple finches. So knowing where different birds are and different times of the year is helpful into identifying the specific bird species. Our third tip is behavior. So certain birds are going to behave a certain way, whether they like climbing a tree trunk. This comic on the left is from a favorite comic of mine, Rosemary Moscow, and she's a naturalist. And it's a really funny picture about 3 of our birds that like to go up and down and on trees. The brown creeper kind of circles up, the white-breasted nuthatch kind of creeps down, and the yellow-bellied sapsucker, as we were talking about at the beginning of our session, it just makes these funny little pencil-shaped holes in a parallel way. And so knowing the type of pattern or behavior that bird is supposed to do will help you kind of limit your choices. Our 4th tip is field marks. So if you look at your bird guide, if you have one, it'll often point to specific things about each bird that makes it unique, whether it might be a particular eye ring or an eye stripe or a type of wing bar. These are the critical parts of a bird that when you're looking through binoculars and studying a bird, you want to focus on, because it might give you a little tip into what you want to look for in order to identify that particular species. And my 5th tip is voice. So, here we are on the left-hand side. My husband Josh and I often go birding in early summer, and we hear that bird somewhere in the bush in that middle picture. We look at the tangle, and that's about as close as we could possibly get. And don't we wish we could get to that right picture? This picture is from a friend of mine, Jim McGinnity in Florida, who bands birds, and this is a rose-breasted grosbeak. Sadly, we tend not to be able to get that close. If we're lucky, we'll at least get the middle picture and kind of get enough of a glance to see it. But I heard it singing, and I knew what it was from the song. And so I really, one of my passions is knowing birdsong and really feeling close to these feathered friends. And so I'm going to give you a couple tools to learn bird songs. One of the things we do is we often try to put a mnemonic to a bird song. So that's basically just putting an English phrase to help us remember the sound. An example of this is the black-capped chickadee. The black-capped chickadee has a song that says, "Spring's here," and I'll play that in a moment. The different people put a different mnemonic on that. Some people will say, Phoebe. I think Barbara, you had a different mnemonic for our chickadee. And then its call will say, it's a namesayer. It says chickadee-dee-dee. So we're going to listen to the mnemonic, "Spring's here," and then its call, the chickadee-dee-dee. Mm-hmm. And not every bird has a mnemonic, unfortunately, but some birds make a sound that reminds us of another sound. So for example, our black and white warbler here on the bottom, its song sort of sounds like a squeaky wheel. And I might share a video of a black and white warbler in a little bit. And now let's talk about some tools in our birder's toolbox. There are some really helpful resources that will make birding more enjoyable for you. And I'm going to start with binoculars. And a note about binoculars, a lot of people tend to have a pair of binoculars from many years ago that they keep in their closet and they whip them out during birding season. And that can be totally fine. I still have my first pair of binoculars. But I also know putting them up to my eyes, it's amazing how hard I have a hard time looking through them. They're just so old and they didn't really fit my face well. And the newer binoculars are just fit better in the hand. I can use them better. And obviously it's going to be a more enjoyable experience. And so I highly encourage you to really give your binoculars a good look this spring. And if you don't have a pair, I highly recommend buying a pair. My pick of the last couple of years has been this Nikon Pro Staff. It's a normal size pair of binoculars. It feels good in the hand. They run about $120, $130. It's an investment, but you'll have them forever. And it really makes bird watching truly enjoyable. Also, having a bird guide is super helpful. And there's tons of bird guides out there. It's hard to know exactly which one to have. Many of you probably already have some bird guide hanging around. I do encourage you to go to a bird shop or even the library, and you can kind of check out the different kinds. Sibley has a very popular bird guide that has sketches. Stokes Field Guide uses photos. If you're really new to the sport, you might want to stick to something super local, like Birds of Massachusetts. And this one's has color photographs, and it's super helpful if you're just starting out. And I'm still a paper person. I still love my bird guides, but I will say apps on phones have just like revolutionized bird watching. I'm going to introduce two to you today. One is this Merlin bird app by Cornell Lab. It's free, and it does two really cool things. It actually does many good things. I'm going to tell you about one of them. It actually is like a Shazam for bird songs, where you can record a bird song and then play it through the app, and it will try to identify the bird for you. So obviously there's a lot of background noise. So it sometimes doesn't get it right, but it's definitely worth playing around with. My other one that I really love is Audubon Bird Guide, and it's also a free app. The cool thing about this is it's sort of like a dichotomous key for birding, where you tap to launch Bird ID, and then you're going to go through a series of just clicks and entering information about it. So the first thing was the size. I saw a bird. I said it was about robin size, and instantly it brings me down to 322 possible matches. And so then I said it's gray. So then it brought me down to 198 matches. I saw it flying. I clicked on that, brought me down to 118 matches. And then I was in my backyard. So then it brought me down to 44 matches. I heard it sing. It kind of was chattering. It had a long tail, and voila, I was down to 3 options. And sure enough, what I ended up seeing was a northern mockingbird. And once you identify it, then you've got different songs that you can listen to. Again, it shows you that range map just to make sure I'm in the right location, season, and range for that particular bird. And it's a super helpful tool. The other really cool thing about the Audubon Bird app is, say you're going to visit a property, you can type in your address. Say you want to visit a local park, or say you're just visiting part of the state. You want to find a local park like Cold Spring Park in Newton. I click on it, and it gives you a listing of birds that were actually seen the most recent day. Someone plugged in information. So this is connected to another app called eBird. Mm-hmm. And when people record their bird sightings, it shows up on this map. And so then you can just scroll down and say, oh, someone was here yesterday and they saw 22 bird species, and it gives you a sense on what you're going to be looking for. Lastly, listening to recordings. And, you know, it's so funny, I still have this Birding by Ear CD. I don't even know who has CD players anymore, but I do love it. I love my CD player, and I listen to it in the car, and it goes through, Birding by Ear goes through each bird and how to actually learn the bird song. It's narrated by a gentleman called Dick Walton. Also, you can check out Cornell's All About Birds website, and you could plug in a bird and learn all about it. And I will just note, because I'm telling you a ton of stuff and I'm going kind of fast here, I'm going to provide you with a Google document that is going to give you all these links to all of the resources I'm sharing. But once you have your tools in your birder's toolbox, you're ready to head outside. And there's definitely some more tips to think about when you get out there. Unfortunately, you have to wake up early to be a birder. And I will say I'm sadly a night owl. So I always have this like inner conflict when spring hits, because I do love to sleep in, but I do love the birds, which is why I often lead bird trips, because it forces me to get up, and then I get outside and do what I love to do. But when you get outside, you do want to find a spot, sometimes just to listen. The picture on the right are these two ladies that I would give some private bird walks to during COVID. And they spent weeks I tried to find a scarlet tanager for them. And we finally got a scarlet tanager. And of course it was way high in the tree. So they just laid down on the trail. and just stared with their binoculars, and they're like, okay, Michelle, you can go to work now. You can just leave us here. You also want to know where to look. So there's going to be places that are better than others. Again, certain birds like certain habitats. So if you can find a natural area or an open space that has a mix of habitats, you're going to increase the variety of birds that you're going to see. So if something includes a pond with a field or a forest edge, shrubs, those are great spots to really look around for a number of different bird species. And lastly, helping learn from an expert is really helpful. I know how frustrating it is when you're just starting to learn and you hear a bird and you can't find it, or you see something flutter by and you didn't get a good enough look, and it can be quite frustrating. The good news is there's lots of bird walks coming up. Spring has sprung, and you can find lots of opportunities out there. So definitely check out your local nature clubs. Mass Audubon offers a number of bird trips. I actually privately lead a number of bird walks in the Metro Boston area. So if you happen to be in this location, there's a number that I do hold. And lastly, practice. It's so important to just get out there and practice as much as you can. And practice with your binoculars. A lot of people have trouble seeing the bird through the binoculars, and that's something you can practice all the time. Just pick up your binoculars, look at a stick in your backyard, and just pick up your binoculars quickly to see if you can get it in view. And getting that quick ability to see something you're wanting to see will help you, because the birds are moving so fast that it'll be a useful skill to try to perfect. I'm going to skip the video over here just because I'm a little afraid I'm going to run out of time. Actually, no, I think I have time. I will just quickly give you this quick little video and talk about my not my flashcards, but I got a copy of these Cornell Lab flashcards. And this is great because unfortunately birds, they only are very active. A lot of birds are only very active in the summer months in Massachusetts. And so we have a long time where we're not hearing them and seeing them. Mm-hmm. So 2 years ago, I ended up getting my husband a set of flashcards. And I'm not usually this mean, I will tell you this, but he spent a good year studying his birds, and then I would kind of grill him on a few birds each night. And remember that bird at the beginning that sounded like a squeaky wheel? So this is going to be just a 30-second video of him seeing if he can remember this in December. Whoops, try that again.
This one is the
You know this one. Wait, no.
I don't know this
yes.
one. I've never known it.
No, come on, Josh. The zebra bird? Squeaky wheel?
Okay.
Think. Squeaky wheel.
Hold on. Squeaky wheel. I don't know.
Come on, think. What are the colors?
Black and white warbler.
Yes. It's black and white warbler, Josh.
I feel like someone's operating on my brain right now.
I love that one just because, sometimes it does feel like someone's operating on your brain when you're learning a new skill, a new hobby, right, ladies? And you just got to stick with it. You just have to, practice, and you will start to get them. You really will. All right, changing topics. Birds are in trouble. And I think we've all probably seen some of the studies and articles that have come out in the last couple of years that bird populations in the continental US and Canada have declined by almost 30% since 1970. And these long-term losses are virtually across all groups of birds. And it's safe to say that in the natural world, birds are the best studied group of wildlife species. The data that exists for birds are just so incredible. From 50 years of data collected from the North American Breeding Bird Survey to 100 years of Christmas bird count data. And now we have thousands of birders compiling data on apps like eBird. With this study, we have finally managed to come up with a way to estimate the number of birds in North America to get to a point where we trust the math. And it turns out over less than a single lifetime, we've lost almost a third of our birds. So I know this is really frightening and it would be so easy to run away from this challenge, but don't worry, there is hope. There are things you can do to help our bird species. And we're going to go over some of those now. The first way to help our birds is to keep our cats inside and our dogs under control. Outdoor cats that roam can kill approximately 2.4 billion birds every year in the US alone. That's a huge number. And even if, this is my cat, Luna, she loves to be outside, but obviously I don't trust her to be nice to our feathered friends. Fortunately, she's like 16 and can barely jump now. So I put her onto my deck and she kind of watches the birds with me. And she still gets to sort of be outside, but in a protected environment. And dogs are not off the hook either, folks. Dog walking in woodlands does lead to a reduction in bird diversity and abundance. So it's in 2007, four-legged, and there was an article called Four-Legged Friend or Foe, showed that dog walking displaces native birds from natural areas. This was through the Royal Society Publishing. That they even just dogs urinating along trail edges can have an effect on our bird species. So think about if you're visiting an open space, to have dogs on leash and to definitely make sure you're picking up your dog waste. Let's talk about habitat improvement. First, in our backyard, lots of people are excited about attracting birds to your backyards. There's lots you can do. You could put up bird houses for birds like bluebirds and wrens. Water source is really critical for birds. So having a bird bath is helpful. Some people put a heated bird bath up so they can have winter water. Be aware if you do have a bird bath in the summertime, you want to clean it out every few days so that you don't have mosquitoes breeding in your bird water. And then bird feeders. There's lots and lots of different feeders to attract goldfinches, from woodpeckers to bluebirds to orioles. There's lots of different options to choose from, and hummingbird feeders like we talked about. And so there's some really great websites that you can learn about what's best for what you want to attract. But I really encourage you, and actually Divisions of Fisheries and Wildlife, I should say Fish and Wildlife discourages bird feeding by bird feeders. But I and Fish and Wildlife definitely encourage feeding birds the native way. So looking at creating a beautiful native habitat in your backyard. That means leaving your seed heads on your wildflowers all winter. Nature likes it messy. Leaving the leaves. We don't want to leaf blow every leaf off our property. Building a brush pile creates habitat. Keeping dead trees for woodpeckers and other birds to nest on, or insects to live in, so birds will eat the insects, and eliminating pesticides in our yards. And there's so many great resources out there if you do want to increase your bird habitat in your backyard. Here's just two samples from Native Plant Trust. There's great samples on plant lists for birds that are native. And then Lincoln Land Trust actually put together a garden and lawn toolkit with an actual schematic showing different types of wildflowers and plants to grow in a very small space. So you can start small, just a little patch, plant a few native plants, increase your pollinator habitat, increase your birds. I'm going to then spend the rest of the time, a few minutes here, just talking a little bit about thinking bigger, right? So, if you are fortunate enough to be on this webinar and own land, to be a woodland landowner, you've got a tremendous opportunity to make some big differences for birds and bird habitat. So populations of many forest birds have been steadily declining in recent decades as the threats continue to grow. We know these threats include habitat fragmentation, development, and air pollution coupled with habitat loss at migratory stopovers, on wintering grounds, and on summer breeding grounds. Climate change adds an element of uncertainty to the future as plant and animal species shift and move. Ecological communities change, and more intense storms change the forest dynamics. With 75% of the Massachusetts forest privately owned, landowners can play a critical role in helping birds and other wildlife face these challenges. Massachusetts forests are vital for the survival and reproduction of many birds. But not all forests are equal when it comes to supporting healthy and diverse bird populations. Different species have different needs when it comes to forest age and structure. The forests in Massachusetts are largely considered to be middle-aged, and there's not much young or old forest. Mass Audubon has partnered with the Department of Conservation and Recreation and Mass Woodlands Institute to bring Foresters for the Birds program to Massachusetts. The Forest for the Birds program provides technical assistance to landowners to manage their forests for bird habitat. And we're so fortunate after my talk to hear Barbara speak personally about her experience managing her forest for bird habitat. Carefully planned and sustainable forestry practices can create young forest habitat that enhances the structure within a maturing forest. With careful planning, you can have a productive working woodland that provides habitat for many of the bird species that call Massachusetts home. Birds require certain forest habitat features. In general, like I said, nature likes it messy. When conducting any type of forestry activity, you want to leave and create features such as snags and downwoody debris, adequate leaf litter, patches of open habitat with lots of herbaceous vegetation, along with a variety of tree species of different ages. Mass Audubon, DCR, and Mass Woodlands produced a guidebook called Birds with Silviculture in Mind. This guide is designed to assist foresters who are interested in improving bird habitat in their forest management strategies. But I thought the guide was an excellent resource which highlights 12 of the bird species which have been identified by National Audubon as being high priorities for protection in Massachusetts. The guidebook provides information on how to identify each bird, their diet, foraging habits. It also describes the forest habitat condition that's most desirable for each species. So next, I'm going to highlight a couple of my favorite forest birds that need protection. And I'm calling this Michelle's 5 favorite forest birds because that sounded so cool, but I actually am going to talk about 6, and I couldn't figure out which one to take off my list. So the first one, and we're also going to start with looking at big gaps in forest floor, and then looking more at closed canopy, thicker forests for different species. So the first one, the eastern towhee, I just love the way this ID tip and all of this information that I'm sharing came from that book there, the Focal Birds Pocket Guide for Massachusetts. And I just love the ID tip to give you: bold, sooty, black above and on throat, warm rufous sides and white belly, shows a white tail and flight. I just love the kind of descriptions they give. And the towhee needs a lot of open habitat. So something that has a young forest habitat with a few standing trees, a lot of dense shrubbery or understory is important. The male is the upper left picture, those rufous sides with a black back. The female's on the bottom right, more brownish. And I'm going to play a video of a towhee singing. The mnemonic we use is "Drink your tea." And I will say on my Google spreadsheet, I'm going to share the Google document I'm sharing. I have a link to Michelle's favorite birdsong YouTube websites, and you could literally just spend weeks watching birds sing on YouTube because A, you never get to see them this close in the wild generally, and B, they're just so fabulous to watch. So definitely check out some of the YouTube videos on bird songs. My next bird we're going to talk about is the white-throated sparrow. This one's more in central western Mass, which we do have a lot of you from today. They tend to want a little bit more forest cover than the towhee, but still less than 50% coverage. They want an uneven aged mixed woods, soft woods, and still though a dense understory. And the white-throated sparrows, they don't generally hang out in eastern Mass, although they're just starting to migrate through. So I did see a white-throated sparrow in Waltham in my backyard, which is very cool. They're appropriately named because of that white throat. And let's listen to its clear whistle, and that some people think it says, oh, Sam, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. It's also so cool just to see how big its mouth is when it goes to sing. I think that's a really cool feature on these videos. My third favorite forest feathered friend, the American woodcock. They have come back from their wintering grounds. They tend to like a mix of some forest habitat, but they definitely need some openings in young forests, particularly near wetlands. They do like sort of a wet meadow like near a forest, perhaps. They eat worms. That's why they have that enormous bill. This is the one I was actually thinking of, the ID tip, the description: a plump bird with a long bill, no neck and short legs. glad I'm not being identified by a book right now. But it does sadly look like a plump bird, long bill, no neck, but enormous bill. It has a prehensile bill. It has this little hinge on the back, not the back, the tip of its beak. So it can stick its beak deep into the ground and eat worms. They need to eat their weight in worms in the springtime. And their call is awesome. They sing at night. So being the night owl, love woodcocks, love leading woodcock walks. In fact, I have two woodcock walks I'm leading in 2 weeks in Eastern Mass. And they sing just at dusk. So like, 7:30 to 8 o'clock right now. And we're gonna watch one start singing. So cool. And what happens to this guy is eventually it's going to start to fly up in the sky. I think it might at the end, and look at its huge eyeballs. Its eyes are further back on its head. Oh, pause there. Its eyes are back towards the back of its head because it's usually looking into the ground. Like its beak is in the ground. So in order to see for predators, it needs to have its eyes further back on its head. Eventually then it will start to fly around. It does this beautiful spiral dance. And ultimately it's trying to attract a mate. Next one up is our northern flicker. This is actually a pretty common bird in Eastern Mass. Strangely, it doesn't say it doesn't have it in Western Mass. So we'll have to check with Barbara because they're so common here. It's hard to believe that they're not common in some places. But do you have any there, Barbara, or you don't really see them?
No.
Nope. That's good to know. I can give you some. There's one.
I'll take them. Happily.
And they also require a pretty, they love woods, love forests, require snags. They need snags of over 13 inches diameter. They do feed, we see them feeding on the ground in neighborhoods in Eastern Mass, this beautiful red patch on its back of its head. And we'll hear it in just a moment here. Let's see. It will nest in birdhouses. Apparently he wants to do some maintenance to it. And there was its call. A bunch of perfect example of what a flicker sounds like, just that constant yep, 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 yep. And then I think this is my last guy. We'll find out. Our black-throated blue warbler, this one, it's so funny because in Eastern Mass, we don't have black-throated blue warblers. And I'm so jealous to learn our Western Mass friends probably do have them out there. And they're a small bird. You don't see them often, but you can hear them. So that's where the sounds come in real handy. And they require more of the 50 to 80% canopy cover with a dense understory. And let's see what this guy sounds like. Sucking down some worms. So I always thought of it as beer, 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 bee. And the mnemonic that the focal bird species for the Birds of the Forest book had was "I'm so lazy," which I really like that one. That one has a tune to it. Oh, that's right. Sorry, I do have one more bird, the wood thrush. So this is getting into our real thicker forest. So over 80% canopy cover, moist leaf litter. We do have 3 types of thrushes in Massachusetts. And this one's pretty widespread in terms of all of our regions. I should have pointed out on the top here, there's these little letters that represent what region of the state each of these birds are found in. So Southeast, Central, and Western, which is pretty cool. And all of our thrushes have beautiful, gorgeous flute-like sounds. They are able to make 2 sounds at the same time. So their vocal cords is called syrinx for birds, and they can produce 2 sounds at the same time, which creates this amazing, eerie, flute-like sound that we're going to hear. Magical. I could listen to that all day long. Okay, a couple more slides here. If you don't have a woodlot to try to enhance for bird habitat, you can still do a lot for bird habitat, and that's, you could support land protection. It is so critical right now that we try to protect as much land as possible, with so much of our forest privately owned and development just going gangbusters in Massachusetts. I really think that we're at a crisis right now on trying to protect as much land as possible, because if we don't do it in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I fear that much of the land that's developable will be developed. So thinking about really partnering and supporting your local land trusts, some of the more national organizations that do big land protection projects, Mass Audubon, all of these do really great things to try to do land protection for birds. And also thinking small now, thinking about everything you do every day, how it can affect birds. So reducing your carbon footprint, because climate change is one of the factors that drives habitat loss. So the more you can do to eat locally, to try to get off of energy sources that are not sustainable, are going to be making a big difference long term. Supporting our state reps and senators, or I should say, asking our state senators and state reps to support open space and climate change policies as well is super important. Big shout out for my favorite birds and beans products. I'm a huge coffee drinker. And some of my favorite here, Dean's Beans, Migration Celebration, And then I just last week picked up some of those birds and beans from our local grocery store, and it's super yummy. I love the names too, wood thrush and chestnut-sided warbler. And that's important because, of course, unfortunately, a lot of beans come from places that are over clearing for coffee plantations. And so there are some sustainable farmers who really work hard to make sure that they're growing their coffee in ways that are also providing bird habitat. All right, this is my second to last slide. The reality is birds also just make us happy. There's a new study that finds birds gives people as much happiness as money. This is from Joel Methorst, a doctoral student at the Sechenberg Biodiversity and Climate Research Center, was the lead author of an article called The Importance of Species Diversity for Human Well-Being in Europe. He states Europeans are particularly satisfied with their lives if their immediate surroundings host a high species diversity. The happiest Europeans are those who can experience numerous different bird species in their daily life, or who live in near natural settings that are home to many species. A 10% increase in the number of bird species in people's surroundings increase their life satisfaction as much as an extra 10% in the bank, the study found. And I have to say, I fully support this. I'm gonna play an audio of a recording that a volunteer at Sudbury Valley Trustees recorded at a property in Sudbury, Mass called Memorial Forest. Sudbury Valley Trustees has also been doing forest management, creating some openings, improving pitch pine habitat. And after just a few years of really working on forest management, they've increased a tremendous number of bird species that they have observed in their forest. I'm just gonna play a 30-second clip listening to, if you went out there on a June morning and just closed your eyes, this is exactly what you would hear. I have a picture of some of the birds you're going to hear in this 30-second clip. It's just fantastic. So I do hope that this has inspired you to get out this spring to help protect our bird habitat, to help learn birds and bird songs. Most of you do not live around me, so my in-walk bird classes or in-person bird walks are too far for you, but maybe not for some. However, because of COVID, I am offering my bird song identification classes via Zoom this year. So if you're interested in learning more about bird songs, here's my shameless plug for some classes I teach through various community education courses. This will be listed on my Google document. And each of these are 2-night programs. So I do about 12 bird species each night. The first 2 programs, May 17th and the 24th, are for backyard birdsong ID. And then June 2nd, June 9th, is that right? 7 days apart, yes, are beyond our backyard. So doing 1 night on forest birds and 1 night on wetland and field birds. And again, those are being offered through 4 different community ed programs that you could sign up from anywhere in the continental US and zoom in and listen to some bird songs with me. So consider that. And with that, I think I'm done. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Julia and Emma.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michele, for that wonderful presentation. I will now turn it over to Barbara Wallace to talk for around 15 minutes about her experience as a landowner using forest management to improve her bird habitat. So go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. Michele, that was wonderful. It makes me envy your job. This sounds great. I live in Leiden, Massachusetts, a small town in Franklin County that abuts Greenfield, Bernardston, Coleraine, and Guilford, Vermont. I live on 36.4 acres for the last 24 years. Prior to that, I lived where there were only sidewalks and streetlights, and I lived on small lots. And till my children went to college, and then I escaped to paradise, for me anyway. So the land that we are on is rectangular, and on two sides you have roads. We'll show you a map in a minute. And we've spent the time, I laugh at myself. People always say they're stewarding the land, but I believe the land has stewarded us, making us more aware of the environment, of wildlife, of the importance of the state of our planet. And we've learned a tremendous amount about what, as an individual, we can do about it. It's been a great trip. So in the process, the most recent grant that we have taken is the Forestry for the Birds grant, which was based on a 2014 program that was done in Vermont very successfully. And so the several nice things about this program, it combines what they term, their acronym is ARCPP, which is Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And I love that. I love things that go across boundaries. And this combined Audubon, the DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and Woodland Institute, which comes under the Franklin Land Trust based in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. Our property has a conservation restriction on it with Franklin, so it will never ever be used for anything else than what it's being used for. I'm abutted by people on that conservation restriction as well. And I've attended the Keystone program. Any of you who are not aware of that, it's an incredible program through UMass, done at Harvard. A forest. It was wonderful for me. And that was probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. I promptly followed that one up by doing coverts in Vermont. And I forget Lisa's last name, but that one is a not-for-profit. It's a foundation, and equally remarkable. And it teaches you pretty much everything that you can imagine about forests, wildlife, proper management. It's full of really wonderful people, both teaching and taking the classes. So if you have the time and apply, I highly recommend it. It really radically changed the way I looked at my land. So we have on the land two major streams, a riparian buffer, an old apple orchard, 2 hay fields, and sort of a wet, shrubby, pastured area too, with a few crab apples. And then we have about 15 acres of woodlands. And we have another wetland, sort of a pond that probably originally was a vernal pool, but because of the road going by, they put a culvert in, and so it's really not a vernal pool anymore. So after hearing, we have done a lot with NRCS, with grants and development of the land. But the last one was this bird project. And we were one of the first people because we had done a lot with them and they knew the land. The requirements really for participating in this are that you have a forest management plan. If you have land with forest, I highly recommend that. So we have been it's a 10-year forest management plan. Our first one, I think, was in '97. So that had to be amended to include how you take care of birds on your land. And once that was amended, it was amended by Scott Sylvester. Those of you in my area may remember Scott. He became ill and he is gone, but he was practically an ornithologist and did a wonderful job. And we learned a lot from him, a lovely man. And so he amended our forest management plan for the birds. And then we had to get an application for the grant. He helped us with that. And then we got to select a forester to draw up the plans of what was required. And we worked with a lovely, lovely woman forester, Mary Wigmore, who's local and terrific, an incredibly intelligent woman who taught us so much that she didn't need to have to spend the time with us. And she told us about, don't take out this bunch of trees, because if you take out 2 of them, what you're going to do is you're going to make them vulnerable to a windstorm. Or don't take these out. They're surrounded in an area where the seeds will grow and you'll get understory. So she educated us tremendously. As you're looking at this map now, you can see the sign that says Alexander Road and Greenfield Road. So we have no buffer there. That just goes right up to a beautiful row of sugar maples down both sides, but not what you would consider an edge zone for birds. We get a lot of orioles in the trees. They're very old maples, and it's beautiful to watch. They're wonderful. On the bottom part by Greenfield Road, you can see that there is a stream and a riparian buffer, and that has a different kind of bird population. The fields are open, and all of our bluebird houses are facing into that field. We have about 12. And the kestrel house is on the corner of where you see the cross marks, which is really the resident land. So each part of the part on the left, you can see it's called STD for stands. The forester Mary Wigmore breaks the land up in the forest by types of trees and terrain. And of course, you want multiple things for multiple types of birds. In stand 6, by the slanted lines, that's the little what would have been a vernal pond. So we have a real wet area and pond area there. Where you see stand 3, there's 2 here in 2 different places. That was primarily hemlock. And if you go to the next slide, it shows you that in her working with you, each stand is the column on the left, tells you what is the primary wood and the approximate size, and then the notes about the types of trees. And as Michele said earlier, different birds need very different environments. So this was a mid-hardwood forest. One of the things that this particular grant, you have to have at least 10 acres, which is exactly what we did out of the 15. You need to have, they do a big soil test. So we had good soil for hardwood forest. So it was pretty easy for us to qualify. And in each stand, they tried to keep the type of tree that would create more mast for feeding for wildlife and birds, the serviceberry for the berries, all the kinds of trees that really are good for wildlife. All stags were left. We have trees with huge pileated holes, which are these beautiful, huge, long, not, what would you call it? Long holes, not round. So we kept everything we could for the birds. The other dream that John and I had for this particular part of the land was to give access to people who don't know anything about what's going on, about birds or about amphibians or insects that are needed for the birds to eat and to leave the leaves on the ground and the brush. So right now, that we had a hold for COVID, but right now we have the wood roads being cleared and benches are being put in so that people can walk through this property that we're fixing and sit and listen to the birds, like many of the slides you saw that Michele showed. And so we're focusing on children and workshops for children in kindergarten and elementary school and elderly who are often not able to get out in the woods, making sure that the stream crossings are very navigable. It's a small property of just 10 acres, so it should be easily done. And we have an area that we can make for parking. We can also work on workshops. For just a small example, we took out a lot of hemlock and ash because they're vulnerable right now. But we left the strongest trees of every kind in this because we really weren't after the financial return of the harvest, but to leave the forest so that it had examples of everything you could learn. So we might put a sign on an ash tree and then ask the child or an adult with a map to go find another one so that they would get the experience of seeing that, or to be able to mark where they saw an ovenbird or heard a woodpecker or whatever. So that's an exciting part, sort of the finishing touches for us for this project. Once Mary Wigmore had drawn up the plan, she also, as our consulting forester, would go out for bids for loggers. And that probably was the most challenging part ultimately in the project. The state forester that we use, Allison Wright Hunter, is also a phenomenal woman with enormous experience and a willingness to share just her vast knowledge. So I was fortunate to work with these two women primarily. The first logger did not work out, and how you deal with that as a landowner is when you do the contract with the logger, they put up a bond or $1,000, let's say, and the forester holds that in the bank in case they don't follow the directions. This particular one didn't, and we had to excuse him. The second one was fine, and we finished the project just quite well, actually. Once the project is finished, NRCS comes in with the state forester, and they make sure it's been done correctly, that we followed the conservation rules, the wetland rules, and we've replaced things properly. And then NRCS maps the land to make sure we cut in the right place. All that information goes back to the providers of this grant, and then you get paid. So from a financial point of view, you can make money on selling the lumber. And in some cases, you can take bulk that they grind up and sell that as well. But mostly you want to think about leaving a good bit on the land itself for the different kinds of animals and birds, like a lot of cover. It's also good for the insects, which feed the birds. So all in all, it's pretty hard to not say this is an exceptional program working really well in Massachusetts. We started it in 2015 and we finished in 2019. And then we pretty much walked into COVID. So it's been a long journey, but we've learned so much, and we are so grateful to Audubon and to NRCS and DCR, all of whom have been wonderful. And if you can select, I think the one thing I would say to somebody doing this, we were just incredibly lucky to have Mary Wigmore and Allison Wright Hunter, who were exceptionally talented and shared information. So I think I probably learned more from them than I have from books in terms of how to take care of the woods itself. So anyone who thinks they might want to do this, I'm more than happy to give you a tour, more than happy to show you the paperwork. I'm happy to help anybody that wants to help a forest or a birds or amphibians or just about anything else. I'm happy to give any amount of time to that. There will be ultimately more workshops here for birds and amphibians and tree identification once we're finished with the project. And those will probably be advertised through Franklin Land Trust and Women on the Land. I'm happy to answer any questions. And the last slide we have is the 40 birds that they were focused on in 2015 when we did the paperwork. Obviously, all of those are not hardwood forest birds. I do have the fields and the riparian buffer and the wetlands attract entirely different ones. And I am an insane bird feeder. And I find that the heated bird bath in the winter is a carnival. The birds bathing, I never would have thought they would do that in the winter. It's delightful to see them. It's almost like having a swimming pool it sits outside 3 windows that we have. So it's heaven in the winter. So I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns that I can for anyone.
All right, thank you so much, Barbara and Michele, for those fantastic presentations. We now will open it up to questions. As a reminder, you can feel free to raise your hand to ask a question or say a comment out loud to our speakers. And you also can feel free to enter any questions that you have into the chat. Catherine, you have your hand raised. Would you like to say your question?
Yeah, this is for Michele. At the very end of her presentation, she had a video, and there was a bird that sounded like a cicada, like a cicada, you know, the bug, very high pitched. Is Michele still there?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if it was, I mean, there was a chooping sparrow that's a fast trill that I'm wondering if that's what you heard.
Yeah. I am one of those very, very beginners.
Okay.
But it was just such unique. Yeah.
So like cicadas are sort of like that sound. It almost sounds like a power line corridor, like that real static, high pitched.
Yeah, it's one line. Yeah.
So I'm thinking it might have been a chipping sparrow that is what you're referring to.
Well, I'll look that up and hopefully I'll know whether that is or not.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, though. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have some questions in the chat. We have a question from Karen that asks if woodcocks eat ticks. Michele?
I mean, they do eat insects, so I think it's possible, but ticks are pretty small. So I would think they're not going to get a lot of energy from them. I do hear people talk about how like guinea fowl and turkeys will eat ticks, but I don't think ticks are a big source of a woodcock's diet.
Interesting. Thank you so much. We have another question about woodcocks, and this one is from Kim and asks if they fly straight up far into the sky.
Yeah, so it's such a cool display to see. The problem is like it's right at dusk, so it's really hard to see with your eyes, but they will kind of, they sort of soar, they do a spiral dance straight up, and they go several hundred feet up. And the problem is when you're looking up at a sky, your eyes have a hard time focusing on a little black dot as it starts to rise, but you can hear it. And if you cup your ears when you're listening for woodcocks towards the sky, you'll hear this beautiful liquid swirling sounds. Some of it's made by their pharynx. A lot of it's actually made by their wing feathers. And it's such a spectacular sound. And then they will spiral, and then at some point they get to a top, and then they dive right back down, and they usually land exactly where they came from. So it's quite, if you're on your land and you hear one, you can kind of, as it's in the sky, sort of move a little bit closer and then stop, and then see as it flies down how close you can get, obviously being sensitive not to get too close.
Very interesting. This is for Barbara, for Michele. She asks, how are your hemlocks managing with woolly adulges?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's a really good question. If you remember the chestnuts trees American chestnut tree, the foresters ended up taking all of them out in the fear of them losing their value. And so if they had left the strongest ones, some of them might have survived and we wouldn't have lost all of them. So I use that theory along with the forester. So we kept the strongest hemlocks and we kept the strongest ash that we felt were the most protected on the position of the property. And we removed any that looked like they were going. But it was an intentional thing to keep the strongest in case they make it and we don't lose the whole species of the tree.
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara. We have another question for you from Linda. She asks, how much funding did you get to cover the cost of forest management work relative to the cost of doing the work?
Well, that's interesting, because the grant that came from NRCS at the end was about 4,300 some change. And the state forester, you don't pay, the state pays the state forester. I paid Scott Sylvester, who was the gentleman that amended he was a forester that was practically an ornithologist, a really remarkable person. And you pay a consulting forester. And I don't remember, it could have been as high as $1,000, because he also did the application to NRCS. So I don't remember exactly how much we paid him. You pay a forester, and I don't remember if we paid Mary by the hour. She gave us a contract, and I wish I could remember. I don't think it was as expensive as Scott's. But then you benefit from the wood, and we sold the wood, and I want to say maybe $2,000 or $3,000. I can't really remember. So you don't lose money on this proposition for sure. The cost of the logging is generally taken out of the total amount that you get from the sawmill that takes the lumber. And then if you want to reduce, as I mentioned, some of the pulp, you want to make sure not to take it all, because covering the ground in areas is really important for the birds and the wildlife. But if it's in excess, you can sell that as pulp. And also that's less money, but it's perfectly happy. Our wood on the land itself was worth a lot more because we didn't cut the best. We wanted to leave the best as examples, and to create more mast and seeding. When you cut the canopy around some of these beautiful trees, you're opening the ground to receive the seeds and to create more. For instance, red oak was one, and some of the other trees that are really good for the wildlife. So I think NRCS has a formula to calculate how much is being cut. We clear cut an acre and then thinned the rest, which is a total of 9.96 acres. So they come up with a formula. As long as we were going to break even, we were going to be fine. But we absolutely did make some money, and that money now is going to clear the paths and put benches in and the things that we want to do in order for people to be able to benefit from what we've done. So probably in the end, it'll be break even. I'm a retired banker. You'd think I'd know, right? I think once you, as I said before, once you realize that the land is really stewarding you, and the incredible amount to learn and to be grateful for far exceeds any financial interest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barbara. We have another question, which is, how do you deal with bears on your land in Layton with the bird feeders?
I think I raise bees. I'm also a big pollinator nut. And so I have beehives, and you really worry about bears for your beehives. So at one point on the land, I raised sheep, because sheep improve old pastures. Sheep give, manure, they crop it, they eat stuff. So I've had a series of processes on the land that, you really don't want to go into probably, but in the process of that, you put up electric fencing. So my entire perimeter, except for the forest, people used to laugh and say we fenced for gerbils, but it was for the sheep. And we have 6 strands of aluminum, because aluminum doesn't hurt wildlife. It bends if an animal hits it. If you have bears and you have an electric fence, the best thing to do is put peanut butter on the electric wire. They'll bite it and they'll go away. If they hit the electric fence with their fur, it's so dense, they're sort of oblivious to it. In the case of a beehive, you have an electric fence and you have a band around it, so that if it does get to the hive, it doesn't knock it apart, because they'll eat the brood and the honey. So In my yard, I have another fence, and the fence is electrified, and I can put that on for bear also. I am quite keen on not having hunters on my property or doing anything that's really harmful to wildlife, except the red squirrel. I'm just so tired of them, I can't see straight. But other than that, I use electric fencing and peanut butter to try to keep my feeders on. I have used, what do you call slinkies on my wires. And sometimes the squirrels will get on the slinkies and then they're gone. I have created all kinds of metal things out of roofing tin. So I am in a constant war with the red. I don't mind the gray squirrels, but the red ones, I'm sorry. So that's me and wildlife. I like all of them except the red squirrel.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Barbara. We have another question related to wildlife, and this question is from Michelle and asks, do you have any issues with excessive deer browsing of seedlings?
Yes, I have deer everywhere. I have one whole hayfield has very old, wonderful Baldwin apples and several other heritage apples. And so it's like the mast in the forest for birds. All the animals love to come and eat the apples as they fall. And we enjoy watching them. And they eat what they eat. I have huge gardens with blueberries and elderberries and currants and gooseberries and everything. And we eat it together. I make jams and the birds get some, and it's just the way I live. You know, I don't throw nets over all that stuff. I don't believe in all that.
Fantastic.
I hope that answers your question. I'm sure I sound like a weird person. I believe in sharing with the wildlife.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, so I'll give everybody a chance. If you have any questions or any comments, you can feel free to raise your hand and ask the question out loud, or you could type it into the chat. Give everyone a couple of seconds to do so.
I just do want to remind people that I'm assuming when you send out the aftermath, I'm very happy for people to know how to contact me if they'd like more information.
Absolutely. I'm still not seeing any questions. So what we can do, oh, that was a clapping. Okay. So what we can do is, Barbara and Michelle, do you have any final remarks that you would like to share with our audience tonight?
I'd just like to say that in COVID, I had such sympathy for people who lived in apartments and were isolated. And I became incredibly aware of my gratitude at living on land. And I think it's important for us to help people be on land if they don't know it. I think that'll help everybody think higher of the helping the environment.
That was great, Barbara. And I think to tie into that too is just, I think I try to remember sometimes when I go outside, just to find a space to sit and listen and just be with open space. That I spent a lot of time talking about learning how to identify birds, but I think it's also really important for us just to embrace the birds and don't worry too much about sometimes what you're listening for or what you're listening to.
Yes.
Just absorb the sounds, absorb the smells, and really take time to be outside and embrace how fortunate and grateful, you know, we are to have this valuable open space, both protected land and also private land where landowners allow public access. And I feel we are so fortunate in Massachusetts to have such a collection of land. Yes, lots still need to be protected, but really just get out there this spring and embrace nature. Know that Barbara and I are here if you have questions. And I really hope to see some of you out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Barbara and Michelle, for those final remarks. I now will turn it over to Emma, who will close out tonight's webinar.
All right, well, I can't finish those beautiful final comments. I can't top that. Goodbye. But thank you so much to both of our presenters. Thank you to Julia, and thank you to everybody who joined us for this webinar. If you would like to hear about other Women on the Land events and opportunities, and to stay connected through our peer-to-peer network, you can join our email listserv by emailing Paul Catanzaro at the email address that we will put in the chat in 1 second here. And I would also like to remind everyone that we will be hosting the Woods Walk event with the Dartmouth Natural Resources Trust on May 7th as a follow-up to this event. And once again, we will be talking about how to manage that property for American woodcock, starting that journey with the landowner there. So feel free to sign up for that with the link we put in the chat. And finally, thank you again so much to our presenters and to everyone who joined us. If anybody else has any questions or comments they would like to share, we will stay on this meeting for a few extra minutes. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for making it possible.
Thank you very much, Barbara.